Curse of Blackmoor Manor is a really tough game to do a shipping video for, because half of the characters are related to each other, and that's just gross. And one of the main characters is a little girl, and that's also gross. So it's creepy trying to think of romance in this creepy game. Let's start with Ethel Botany. Most people are scared of Ethel. She shows up out of nowhere and threatens you, and she likes doing creepy rituals in the middle of the night. That is not girlfriend material, that is nightmare material. However, maybe she can take advantage of that. If she asked Nigel out on a date, he'd probably say yes because he's too scared to say no. They're both scholars who are obsessed with the Penvillin family history. I could see them going on a few dates and talking about the Penvillins, but I'm not sure if anything long term would develop. To be honest, I have a hard time seeing Ethel date anyone. It's difficult to see her as anything other than creepy. She's got a nice singing voice, and I guess her ponytail is cool, but it's just so out of place to picture her, or anyone else in this game, in a romantic situation. I thought about Abby from Message in a Haunted Mansion. Ethel reminds me of Abby if she was less goofy and more threatening. I don't know if it's a stereotype to have the two redheads date each other, though. So I'm gonna pull a random person out of my hat. Alan Payne, the British guy from Haunting a Castle Malloy. I don't think we have many other British characters to choose from, to be honest. They're mostly centered around this game. Mrs. Drake is also a tough one. We don't know anything about Mr. Drake, her dead husband. Mrs. Drake is a very prim British lady. I think if she dated anyone at all, there's a 50% chance she would get upset and go home early. Oh, he used the wrong spoon. I will not tolerate such blatant disregard for propriety. Is there a stuffy older man that she can date? I'm not sure. Dexter Egan and Red Knot are grumpy old men. They would probably be fine with meeting Mrs. Drake and complaining about other people. Or maybe Tex. Tex is a grumpy guy who barely talks, and maybe that's what Mrs. Drake needs. Somebody who will listen to her complain all day without talking back. Richard Topham might be a possibility. He's not stuffy, but he's very pretentious. Mrs. Drake is somewhat pretentious too. It's still kind of hard to imagine Topham loving anybody other than himself, so I don't know about that. I also thought Dr. Craven. He's obsessed with plants, just like Mrs. Drake is. Maybe he comes to Blackmoor to research some of the unique plants that the Penvillins bred. He meets Mrs. Drake and there's a spark. They spend the whole night talking about plants and leaves. The only problem is that he'd eventually get mad and throw a temper tantrum for no reason, and I don't see Mrs. Drake putting up with that. I'm gonna choose Mrs. Drake and nobody. I just cannot see her dating anyone here. Linda Penvillin is married to Hugh. Their marriage doesn't appear to be a happy one. The first time you see Linda, she's yelling at Hugh on the phone. It sounds like he's accusing her of making things up, and she's certainly furious that he's out of the country when she's turning into a werewolf. But when you call Hugh on the phone, he seems like a normal person. He claims Linda goes into fits of rage for no reason. And yeah, when you talk to Linda, she does get mad for no reason, so maybe he's right. Their marriage is normally great, but now she's just in a terrible place. It's just hard to judge what Linda is normally like. Even in her most normal moments in this game, she's insulting Jane or Mrs. Drake. So when she's not angry, she's mean. I just mentioned some mean characters like Tex and Red Knot. They might work. I don't want to see a relationship where both people are mean to each other all the time. Yeah, I know relationships work better when the people have things in common, but I think a mean personality could be the exception to that rule. I'm going to keep Linda with her husband Hugh. I'm going to have Hugh stay with Linda too. Hugh's in Italy in this game, so it might be funny to pair him with Margarita Faubourg from Phantom of Venice. Jane Penvillin. Jane thinks Brady Armstrong is cute, but he's way too old for her. Like, way too old for her. Like, 20 years too old for her. Maybe if he became younger, he could hang out with her. He'd probably be nicer if he was a little kid, come to think of it. The other child character we have in the Nancy Drew series is Lucas from The Captive Curse. He's bored all the time and obsessed with pranks. Jane is bored all the time and obsessed with puzzles. She does some pranks. So they could relieve their boredom by having play dates together. I don't think it's going to lead to romance. They're too young for that, but I think they'd still have fun together. Nigel Mukherjee is boring. So boring. Do we have anybody else who's as boring as he is? I think even the historians from Secret of the Scarlet Hand would be bored by him. I'm going to say Ethel. Nigel and Ethel are the only characters in this game who are around the same age. I think she's a better girlfriend for him than he is a boyfriend for her. Nancy Drew. Well, not Nigel. Nancy's boyfriend Ned was okay in this game, so I'd go with him. Well, I'm going to be fun and say Tommy Tucker from the Boar's Head Pub. Nancy tries to solve the puzzle of deciphering his Cockney slang, and she falls in love. As for the phone characters, I just said Tommy with Nancy and Hugh with Linda. Mrs. Petrov presumably goes with Mr. Petrov, whoever he is. I guess that leaves Paliki Vadas, the werewolf expert. She sounds a lot like Dr. Predivichu, to the point where people get those characters confused. So I'm going to go with Dr. Predivichu. They can be phone twins. They can just be people who call each other for expert advice. So here's a recap of all my choices. I want to confirm that Jane should be friends with Lucas. She should not date Lucas, they are too young for that. Let's see what the internet says. Mrs. Drake with Tommy Tucker, our Nigel. There were far more votes for Tommy. I'm guessing it's because she's the only character who mentions him. Nigel Mukherjee with Ethel, that makes sense. His second poll was a tie between Nancy and Hugh. Tommy and Other were pretty close contenders in this poll, too, so Nigel can just date everyone. Ethel Botany had a tie with Tommy and Hugh. Nigel's the clear leader in her Other poll. Linda Penvillin should date her husband, clear majority. Again, the second poll is a near tie. That's the downside of doing two polls for each person. It's almost like I need a follow-up poll to decide the winner. Hugh Penvillin should date his wife Linda, and Other, who's presumably Linda. Tommy Tucker with Mrs. Drake and Other, so I'm guessing Mrs. Drake and Tommy are a thing. Paliki Vadas with Ethel and Tommy. There was a write-in vote for Dr. Predivichu. Nancy Drew with Ethel and Other. I did not do a poll for Jane because that was just too creepy. I think the internet agrees this was kind of a creepy game to try to do a shipping for, because there were not a lot of votes in these polls. I didn't do a poll for Lulu because Lulu's a parrot. We know Lulu has a granddaughter, so she found bird love somewhere. I'm a little worried about Ghost of Thornton Hall. It has all the same problems as this game. Everybody's related to each other, and it's just creepy, weird. It's hard to imagine them in a place that's not creepy and weird. So I guess I have that to look forward to.